Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming out today. I am Olga George, the City of Pittsburgh and Mayor Ed Gainey's press secretary. Today, we will have Deputy Mayor Jake Pawlak, who's also the Director of Office of Management Budget, OMB, speak to you regarding the usage of a P card by Parks and Recreation Director Catherine Vargas. At this time, I'll be bringing forward Deputy Mayor Jake Pawlak.
Thank you, Olga. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. The purpose of today's press conference, as Olga mentioned, is to release the findings of an OMI investigation initiated by Mayor Gainey regarding the usage of a P card by Parks and Recreation Director Catherine Vargas. When this matter was brought to light, the mayor requested that the Office of Municipal Investigations, which is the agency established by code as responsible for coordinating the receipt, analysis, and investigation of civil and/or criminal misconduct alleged against city employees, open an investigation into the claims. I would like to thank OMI for their thorough and impartial investigation, which required more than 2 months and many staff hours to complete. In the initial public dialogue on this issue, it was widely asserted that a series of payments made to a city contractor constituted a violation of the city's P card policy. OMI's investigation ultimately found that claim to be incorrect on the grounds that the services provided by the contractor constituted a non-professional service rather than a professional service. The P card policy only prohibits the use of P cards for professional services. More detail on the distinction between professional and non-professional services are included in the materials that were just distributed to you. OMI's investigation did, however, determine that this series of payments violated the city's mid-year position request policy and that the total amount of payments in 2023 exceeded the limit allowed by Chapter 161 of City Code without explicit council authorization. OMI's investigation further found that there was no basis for assertions that the circumstances surrounding the contractor's hiring were motivated by a prior relationship between the contractor and Director Vargas. You've been provided with copies of the findings of OMI's investigation, with only the names of city employees who were interviewed as part of the investigation redacted in order to protect the integrity of the investigative process. To the best of our knowledge, this is only the second time since OMI was formed that the findings of such an investigation have been released to the public. On the basis of OMI's findings, I have determined that the errors in judgment and violations of internal city rules made by Director Vargas warrant the following actions: immediate retraining on the city's P card policy, additional supervision of the department's P card transactions by the Office of Management and Budget for 1 year, and the recording of OMI's report in the director's personnel file to inform disciplinary action in the event of future violations of city policies. The administration has determined that OMI's findings do not present grounds for termination. Director Vargas has readily accepted responsibility for her actions and has already undergone the required P card retraining on the proper usage and filing of P card transactions. And all P card transactions initiated by the department have been subject to additional review and approval by OMB since late May. The Gainey administration believes hardworking, exemplary employees who make honest mistakes should be allowed to learn from those mistakes and have an opportunity to do better. Director Vargas has led her team to do great work in service to Pittsburgh residents, and we have every confidence that she will continue that work with the energy, empathy, and integrity that she has always made the center of her public service. With that, I will take your questions.
Jake, can you talk a little bit about the request by the District Attorney's Office?
Yes, the District Attorney's Office on several instances requested a copy of the report and the investigative file. We informed them that as those are not public documents, we would need a court order to provide them because of the confidential nature of the materials that are contained within them. We've since received one and fully complied with their request. They have the full report as well as the entire investigative file.
So you were expecting this to come yesterday, then? My understanding, and I guess it's others as well, is that the search warrant was served yesterday. Is that true? And you were expecting it sounds like you said.
We weren't expecting we didn't know when it would come, but we had advised them that in order to release the documents, they would need to provide one. Obviously, they needed a judge to sign such an order, so we didn't have a sense of their timing.
And the timing of this event here today has nothing to do with the fact that you received that yesterday?
Well, we were planning on releasing the findings of OMI's report before the end of the month. Given that we received the warrant yesterday, we wanted to make sure that we released this information, alongside that.
You said this was only the second time that a OMI report had been released to the public. What makes this investigation different than others that the OMI has done?
Most OMI investigations are not initiated in response to such, public circumstances. The mayor's request that the investigation happen itself was very public, and so we felt it appropriate to close the loop with the public about its findings. The other instance was an investigation against former police chief Cameron McClay, which he self-released.
So the request from the DA's office that you felt required a subpoena, did they request material in addition to the things covered by the subpoena that have already been supplied or are going to be supplied or are a matter of dispute?
The only things they requested, to my knowledge, were a full OMI report and the investigative file that comprised all of the evidence that went into forming the report. That list of physical evidence is in the materials that you have. Those were the only things that they requested, to my knowledge, and all of that's been provided to them. I don't believe there's any outstanding dispute over other records they request.
Did they specify why they wanted this? Was there any specification in the warrant?
Yeah, if you want a copy of the warrant, I think you'd have to either ask them or submit a right to know request.
Can you provide that to us?
We can't give it to you, but we'd be happy to submit a right to know request for you if you'd like to them. And the solicitor is happy to do that. Yeah, but sure, I understand. I just wanted to offer.
Was it a warrant or a subpoena?
It was a search warrant. So I can say generally that they have investigators who look into such matters. The Pittsburgh police, which would normally initiate an investigation that would be referred to them, have not investigated the matter. We're not aware of any private criminal complaint. So it's not entirely clear to us why they're investigating, but again, with appropriate documentation, we're of course happy to comply.
To be clear, that all they were requesting was information related specifically to the use of P cards here, as opposed to a search warrant asking for the use of P cards, more generally any records relating to the use of P cards by other city staffers.
All they asked for was the OMI file that we had created here.
Which led to this thing that's in front of us.
That's right. What you have there is the list of physical evidence, timeline, and conclusions of OMI. Other materials include interview transcripts that led to the production of that report that we haven't provided here.
Do you have any idea how many P cards are out there in the total budget for P cards?
It's not something that we budget for in that way, right? It is one of multiple transaction methods that draws from the same expense accounts as checks might otherwise draw from. So there isn't a budget number associated with it. I believe there are approximately 70.
70, yeah.
Is there an explanation in the OMI investigation about why Vargas would have contracted with this employee after the employee was dismissed for cause?
Yes, and in fact that is discussed in the conclusions in the documentation that you've received. Director Vargas was aware of the then employee's termination, aware of the reasons for that termination, and felt that notwithstanding what seemed to be barriers to effective performance in the position with the Department of Public Safety he had previously held, could still provide value to the city's farmers market operations, and that this would be a meaningful way to improve the markets. I think the report itself explicitly says she saw potential in him.
Does that hold water in your estimation?
Yes, excuse me. Yes, it does.
So going forward, could there be any circumstance where this specific contractor might be considered for or granted payment, whether via P-card or otherwise?
The conclusions of OMI's report are that given the what ultimately ended up being the number of hours worked, that this would have been more appropriately made a city position, which is why the findings state that it's a violation of the city's mid-year request policy. We would not engage in a contractor relationship like this again after the results of this determination. Specifically regarding the contractor in question, that's ultimately a question that's related to subsequent and unrelated criminal charges.
It's stated that she had no prior, the Director Vargas had no prior involvement or relationship with this employee. Was any other member of the administration bring influence to bear with the contracting of this employee?
No.
None?
None.
Was that examined in the investigation?
It was not examined in the investigation, but I can tell you that there was no other involvement in the decision to make the hire.
Why was it
Hold on a
paid?
second, one at a time, guys, one at a time.
If there's no investigation, how can you say that definitively?
I know it to be true from our internal discussions about this question. The subject that OMI was asked to review was whether or not there was a prior relationship between Director Vargas and the individual in question, which was found not to be substantiated.
How did she become aware of him, though? How did she know?
During his time as a city employee, she was aware of his role with the city. This was at a time when the Special Events Office was transitioning from the Department of Public Safety to the Department of Parks and Recreation. They then met at one of the farmers markets where they discussed these opportunities. But there was no outside, other than in the context of that city work, and understanding of each other.
Julia?
Thank you. Could you speak at all to the discrepancies in the dates and hours on his last invoice, and was that discussed in the OMI investigation?
It was included in OMI's investigation. I don't know if it is specifically addressed in their summary of findings. The director ordered the termination of the contractor's work with the city effective a date in April, which is noted in the report. He then showed up at an event following that date and initially submitted an invoice that included hours worked at that event. She then requested that he remove the hours that were after their established termination date from the invoice, which would account for the discrepancy, I believe.
There was a week prior to that, though, that hours were added on the second invoice. Can you shed any light on to what happened there?
I can't right now, but we can follow up with you on that. I believe that is addressed in the file.
You mentioned a retraining of employees, including Vargas, on the P-card program. Can you flesh out what that is specifically, I guess, at all?
So every year, all city employees who have a P-card or who approve P-card transactions are required to go through standard training. Their P-cards are deactivated at the end of the year when we close out all transactions for the purposes of closing the accounts for the fiscal year, and they're not turned back on until annual training is completed, usually in January. We, in May of this year, we repeated that process for all P-card holding staff or staff that approve P-card transactions. So in fact, in addition to Director Vargas and her staff, all city staff had a second round of training this year. And that training focused especially on the P-card policy and what types of transactions are appropriate or not appropriate. That is always part of the training, but much of the training is also how to use the back-end system, that runs the requests. This was especially focused on policy.
Is it any more rigorous, though, than those annual trainings that would have happened otherwise, I guess, or are you just doing it in the middle of the year, if that makes sense?
Again, it was a refresher on with a specific focus on the policy requirements to utilize a P-card. That's the purpose of the training. As I said, and this is unique to Parks and Rec, there is additional approval required before P-card payments are processed for the department in light of these circumstances.
Did the investigation determine how soon the city terminated its relationship with the employee after finding out that the employee was a suspect in this anti-Semitic act?
The relationship was already scheduled to be terminated before that was determined, on the basis of the funding available for the year being exhausted. It was once determined that that had been the case. Actually, I believe it was the contractor himself who indicated an inability to continue working, and so the relationship was terminated as soon as, if not slightly before, that came to light.
All right, one more question?
Go
ahead, Bill.
Beyond the details in this specific instance, as a result of the administration's own review, are there, do you believe, does the mayor believe there are any changes in the P-card rules or program that are needed beyond this that will be initiated? Or was there no problem at all with the P-card system and using the P-card system? It's just some specific things that came up in this case.
We believe the policy itself, which dictates when it is and isn't appropriate to utilize a P-card, is appropriate, remains appropriate. That the issue here was not that policy, but its misapplication in some instances. We have changed the way that we monitor them on the back end. So the focus previously, and I've said this to council as well at the table before they left for recess when there were some questions about this. Our focus primarily had been in determining within a particular transactional period, like on an individual statement from the P-card provider, whether multiple transactions with the same vendor added up to a total that exceeded the limit, and ensuring there was appropriate documentation there. We've begun looking more long-term over trends in the transactions to see if there are repeated charges for the same or similar amounts with a single vendor over time. Those are not necessarily violations, but they would indicate that it is likely more appropriate to have a contract of a different form in place rather than making P-card payments. So we're now able to proactively identify instances where, if we're using the same vendor for substantially similar services multiple times, we would migrate to a different form of contract and a different form of payment.
One more question about the switch from the check to PayPal. Was there an explanation of why the person was paid by check initially and then switched to PayPal?
Yes, because it took so long for the check to be processed. So the request to pay via a different method was a result of the desire to make more timely payment.
That wasn't to cover up this payment?
No.
Has the city received any other search warrants from the district attorney's office, search warrants or subpoenas? I know they sent a letter, a request for information concerning the police study, I believe, when that happened.
Yeah, so I in fact, thank you for asking that one, Rick. I addressed that one, I think, about a year ago down on the portico. There have been no other search warrants received by the city from the district attorney's office regarding many of the other incidences that they've publicly commented on, but have not, to our knowledge, actually completed any investigations of. I think this is another example of the district attorney's office pursuing an issue that has received media attention, but we feel that there's ultimately no basis for a criminal investigation of this type. That certainly was the case there, and we believe it's the case here as well.
Do you know when
NASCAR
the office hasn't publicly commented on?
We've not received any search warrants from the district attorney's office, other than this one.
When this individual was initially hired by public safety, it's my understanding from multiple sources that he was not the first choice to be hired by public safety, but the mayor's office stepped in and said he should be hired. Are you aware of that?
I have no way of knowing whether he was the first choice to be hired for anything, because those would be personnel records retained by
Do you
the
know if the
department.
office stepped in?
I'm getting to that. I can tell you with absolute certainty that we did not, the mayor's office, the mayor, or no one in the administration intervened to ensure his hiring. All right. Thank you all.
All right, thank you.